Leo's Ascent. In a quiet village nestled at the foot of the massive Great Blue Range, there lived a boy named Leo. Leo was smaller than the other children and often found himself trailing behind in their games of tag and climb. He wasn't the fastest and he wasn't the strongest, but he had a gaze that clung to the highest, snow-dusted peak of the mountains like an anchor. One early morning, while the sun was still a warm, golden promise beneath the horizon, Leo prepared. He packed a rustic wooden table with simple provisions, a crust of golden bread, and a hand-carved wooden flask filled with fresh water. He knelt down on the wooden floor of his room, tugging the honey-colored leather laces of his sturdy hiking boots until they snapped tight, a final act of readiness. With a deep breath, he stepped out of his door and into the yellow, swaying grass of the meadow. The first miles were gentle. The winding path was soft beneath his boots, and the morning light was cheery and bright. But as the sun climbed higher, the cheerful trail vanished, replaced by sharp gray slate and narrow, treacherous ledges that demanded all his focus. Leo's posture changed. He leaned forward sharply, using his hands against the cold rock for balance as the slope became a wall. Fatigue arrived. It wasn't just a whisper, it was a weight that wrapped around his legs. His scuffed knees trembled with every upward push. Small, translucent puffs of mist escaped his lips, a sign of the thinning, chilly air. Finally, his body refused. He slumped onto a soft, mossy rock beside a bubbling glacial stream. He was exhausted, his shoulders hunched in defeat. He lifted his head, and his gaze traveled up the vertical, terrifying cliff face that still stood between him and the summit. It looked impossible. His spirit, once an anchor, began to waver. Then, a small noise, the sharp click of hooves on stone. Leo turned and saw it. From behind a massive lichen-covered boulder, a baby mountain goat appeared.
Whoa, a goat! Up here? Bah, so fluffy. Can I pet you? What can? Ah, please! Wow, your fur is so soft. Friends say? What a perfect day for an adventure, buddy! Bah, let's go! All right, follow me. Bah, right behind you. The view from the top is going to be amazing. Bah, I can't wait! This trail is tougher than I thought. Bah, don't worry, follow me. All right, let's keep going. Bah, watch your step here. Whoa, this view is amazing. All right, buddy, ready for the next part? That's the spirit, we're almost at the ridge. Careful on these loose rocks.
And leapt upward. It landed perfectly. The small goat continued its ascent until it reached a high, sun-drenched ledge. There it perched, silhouetted against the bright blue sky, and looked down. It tilted its head at Leo, its gaze bright and unblinking. Leo watched the goat, and the impossible cliff suddenly looked different. It wasn't a wall. It was a path made of small, brave choices. It was one foothold, then the next. A spark, warm and bright, returned to Leo's eyes. He pushed himself off the mossy rock and stood tall, mirroring the goat's balanced, steady stance. He dusted off his knees and looked at the immediate step in front of him. The climb was still brutal. The wind blew cold, trying to push him back, but Leo tucked his chin into his thick knitted sweater and pushed forward. When his leg muscles burned like fire, he didn't look up at the remaining peak. He narrowed his vision to a single, deep close-up of his boot pressing firmly and confidently on the sharp rock directly in front of him. One step, then the next, rhythmic, steady. Hours bled away until finally the ground leveled out. Leo stepped onto the flat, frozen crown of the Great Blue Range.
The world below was a vast, silent quilt of greens and browns, the clouds drifting like giant tufts of wool around his waist. The sun, setting now, bathed the peak in an epic cinematic glow of oranges and purples. Leo spread his arms wide, the wind a reward, not an obstacle. He hadn't been the strongest, and he hadn't been the fastest, but he stood where only the eagles flew because he had refused to stop. The white mountain goat, waiting on the peak, stepped quietly to his side.